It is my honor to be with you all today, and it is my distinct privilege to bring to you a personal message from His Majesty King Charles. It reads, "I am greatly saddened not to be with you in..."
You okay?
Well, he's left a giant-sized hole in our lives. I think the whole grieving process is probably likely for us to take a lot longer. It's only when you would do the normal things that you would have done with them and you suddenly realize that they are not there, that you really start to have a, oh my goodness moment.
Buckingham Palace after dark. The windows fog gently with the breath of a London evening, reflecting the soft glow of hallway lamps. Dim, steady, dignified. In this place, so accustomed to protocol and stillness, even the slightest sound can shift the atmosphere. A door creaked open. It was nearly midnight when the quiet rhythm of the palace was interrupted by a presence, not of noise, but of weight. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, stepped through. No sash, no fanfare, no podium. Just a woman with worry in her eyes and a single sheet of paper gently folded in her hand. A message no one truly wanted to hear aloud. She stood for a moment, gathered herself, then spoke. Not loudly, not with grand intonation, but with a softness that carried further than any official decree. He's fighting so hard, but the doctors say he may not last much longer. Her voice didn't crack, but it faded just slightly at the end, as if the final words had too much weight to fully leave her mouth. Across the room, shoulders shifted, gazes dropped. No one wept loudly, yet it was clear they were not just hearing an update, they were living a goodbye. Outside the window, wind moved through the old palace trees. The ancient clock ticked on, indifferent and unhurried. Within that room, though, time seemed to pause, as if awaiting the familiar footfall of a father, a brother, a king. But it never came. Sophie said nothing more. She didn't need to. That single line, plain, raw, unadorned, was enough. Sometimes truth spoken quietly by the right person at the right moment becomes more powerful than any royal signature or state declaration. There were no trumpets that night, no ceremony, just a whisper that broke the silence like a fault line through glass, signaling not just the possible end of a reign, but the quiet beginning of a new chapter. In a family often measured by titles and headlines, Sophie has never been defined by either. She moves not with the command of position, but with the gravity of presence. Always just behind the curtain, always there when the room quiets and the weight of tradition becomes too much for even royalty to carry alone. To the public, she is composed. To the family, she is essential. Her closeness with the late Queen Elizabeth wasn't built through photo calls or state dinners. It was nurtured in the quiet hours, over handwritten notes, late phone calls, or the shared silence of two women who understood that strength doesn't always need to speak. The Queen, a master of reading people, saw in Sophie something rare, loyalty without performance. That bond lives on now in the trust placed upon her, not by decree but by quiet consensus. Those within palace walls often describe Sophie as the one who notices. She notices when a shoulder sags under grief, when a glance across the room asks for help without words. And when Charles's illness began to cast a longer shadow, it was Sophie who began to fill the spaces others were too shaken to enter. She never announced her role, she simply stepped into it. In recent months, she has spoken in his place at memorials, carried his words with grace to foreign dignitaries, and stood in uniforms not tailored for her, but worn with dignity nonetheless. And when the time came to speak the words no one else dared, she did not hesitate. Her power has never been in volume. It is in constancy. While others rise and fall with popularity, Sophie remains. No scandal clings to her name. No ambition clouds her actions. She walks forward not because she is summoned, but because someone must. And in that stillness, in that steadiness, she has become what few in royal life ever achieve, a source of quiet truth. There is something profoundly humbling about watching a king grow tired. Not from the weight of duty, he has carried that with poise for decades, but from the quiet toll that illness takes when no one is watching. Charles has always walked in history's shadow, a prince far longer than he was ever meant to be, an heir who waited half a lifetime before wearing the crown. When it finally rested upon his head, it was not with the exuberance of coronations past, but with the still resolve of a man who knew that the burden of sovereignty came late and came heavy. Since his cancer diagnosis in early 2024, the world has watched him persist. Appearances continued, trooping the color, state banquets, solemn tributes. He smiled, waved, stood. But behind the gold brocade and carefully curated photographs, there were other details. A bloodshot eye, the subtle assistance of a walking aid, a glance that lingered longer than before, as if savoring the present in case the future grew uncertain. Inside palace walls, aides whisper that treatments have extended far beyond what was expected. He's dealing incredibly well, one senior official shared, but there are days when it's clear the crown weighs more than usual. Hospital stays, complications, silent hours behind drawn curtains, and still he insists on continuing, on showing up. But kings are not immune to human limits, and Charles, more than any monarch before him, seems painfully aware that his reign may be more of a bridge than a destination. It is this awareness that shaped the recent royal decree, a document signed not with flourish, but with foresight. Not because he is surrendering, but because he is preparing for the inevitable, for continuity, for legacy. Those closest to him say he no longer speaks of decades, but of years, sometimes months. His language has shifted, less about plans, more about stewardship, less about sovereign rights, more about preserving stability for those who will come after. In quiet moments with William, he speaks not as king to heir, but as father to son. "You've got what it takes," he reportedly told him, not as a farewell, but as a release. A passing of responsibility wrapped not in ceremony, but in love. And that is perhaps the greatest paradox of Charles's reign. For a man so long misunderstood by headlines, his truest impact may lie in the unseen, in his silent grace, in his delib. It did not arrive with fanfare. There was no televised moment, no red velvet table under golden chandeliers. Instead, it came quietly, as so many royal decisions do, born not from performance but from necessity. A single sheet of parchment resting atop the king's writing desk, the ink still glistening faintly as dawn approached. The decree was not an abdication. It was an act of foresight, a choice made by a sovereign who, though still standing, had begun preparing his house for what lay ahead. Its contents were known only to a few, but its meaning? It echoed through the halls, unspoken yet deeply understood. Those who saw it say the signature bore the hesitance of reflection. Not weakness, but weight. It was the kind of writing that pauses between strokes. A monarch's hand, still steady yet no longer gripped by certainty, authorizing a shift that would quietly redefine the structure of the crown. The document reaffirmed William as heir, but entrusted far more than the title of Prince of Wales. It extended decision-making authority. It widened the sphere of Catherine's role. It did not alter the order of succession, but it reordered trust. Within palace corridors, it was not called a transition, but a rebalancing. Catherine would step further into the light, not as queen-in-waiting, but as an active architect of the monarchy's modern soul. William would begin to speak with greater weight in matters of state. Their appearances, once ceremonial, now carried intent. They weren't simply being prepared for the future, they were being invited to shape the present. And so in the stillness of a fading night, a chapter was outlined, not with trumpets, but with tempered resolve. Not to announce the end of a reign, but to signal the quiet rearrangement of a legacy already underway. She was never born into this world of brocade and protocol. She entered quietly, through love, through patience, through years of silent preparation. And yet now, as the monarchy reshapes itself around shifting shadows, Catherine stands not at the edge, but at the center. To the public, she has always seemed composed, a reassuring smile, a steady presence beside William. A mother of three navigating royal life with disarming calm. But beneath that grace lies a resolve that has grown more visible with each passing year, especially now. The recent decree did not make her queen, but it gave her something perhaps rarer, the power to act, to decide, to shape. For the first time in over a century, the Princess of Wales has been granted authority to issue royal warrants. On parchment, it is a signature. In practice, it is a quiet revolution. Not since Queen Alexandra in the early 1900s has a woman in Catherine's role wielded such formal influence. She can now lend royal endorsement to causes, organizations, even industries that reflect the values of a modern crown. But more importantly, she can steer culture without ever raising her voice. This isn't about grand speeches or orchestrated power plays. It's about gestures that speak in subtler tones, a hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder during a public ceremony, a brief pause to speak with a child at a hospital visit, a moment of reflection during a remembrance service. These are not headlines. They are moments that echo. Those closest to her say the role weighs heavily, not because she is unprepared, but because she is careful. Every move is considered, every word measured, and still she carries it with a sense of quiet purpose that separates her from both her predecessors and her peers. Unlike Diana, whose power lit the sky in moments of defiance and pain, Catherine's influence moves more like the tide, steady, inevitable, and profoundly shaping. She has no need to push against the institution. She is, in many ways, reforming it from within. Palace aides note that in private, she is warm, curious, sometimes deeply emotional when speaking about her early childhood work or mental health initiatives. There is a humanness to her that makes people lean in, not back. And perhaps that is her most modern gift, her ability to be relatable while carrying an ancient role. Her children, George, Charlotte, Louis, see in her both a guide and a shield. She ensures their world is filled not just with duty, but with joy. Insiders recall one moment, unseen by cameras, where she knelt beside Charlotte after a long ceremony and whispered a joke that brought instant giggles. A princess, yes, but also a mother first. Now, as she steps further into the architecture of power, Catherine does so not by command, but by invitation. The monarchy needs her, not just as a symbol, but as a soul. She has never asked for the spotlight, but when it comes, she meets it, not with performance, but with presence, not with a crown, but with clarity. And so, with William at her side and a generation watching closely, she begins to redefine what it means to be royal. Not louder, not grander, but deeper, truer, and profoundly human. He has lived his life beneath the shadow of expectation, a future king shaped not by choice, but by lineage. And yet, William has never worn that expectation like armor. He has worn it like skin, sometimes tender, sometimes marked, always evolving. From a boy who walked behind his mother's coffin to a man who now shoulders the weight of a crown not yet his, William has grown into his role without announcing his arrival. He does not speak often in public about legacy, nor does he rush to redefine tradition. But within palace walls, it has long been understood. He is the axis around which the family quietly turns. The decree that followed Sophie's midnight words did more than empower Catherine. It gave William something he has always been prepared for, but never openly invited into agency. Authority not in name only, but in action. Advisors now consult him more directly. His voice now carries weight in decisions once reserved for his father alone. And yet, he does not see it as elevation. He sees it as stewardship. Those who have worked with him speak of someone who listens first, who asks without presumption, who carries his mother's empathy, but expresses it with a tempered grace that is all his own. At charity events, he doesn't simply attend, he lingers, engages, remembers names. At state functions, he balances formality with warmth, often offering a quick smile that disarms even the most rigid protocol. In private, he has become his father's sounding board. Their relationship, once defined by the inevitable tension between generations, has deepened into something more tender. One aide recalled a quiet exchange in the garden just days before the decree was signed. Charles, tired but lucid, placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said simply, "It's your turn to lead, just not alone." William didn't answer, he just nodded, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not abdication, but affirmation. A baton handed not in ceremony, but in trust. Alongside Catherine, he moves with a steadiness that grounds the monarchy in a time of uncertainty. He is not the revolutionary. He is the bridge, the quiet current that ensures the institution does not drift too far from the shore. He knows the history, he has lived the scrutiny, and still, he walks forward. Not because it is demanded, but because he believes in what this role can mean when lived with humility. In an age of spectacle, William offers something rarer, restraint. And that, perhaps more than any title, is what makes him not just the heir, but the anchor. Change, even when expected, rarely arrives without tension. But within the House of Windsor, something different unfolded. Not resistance, not rivalry, something quieter, a kind of alignment. It did not come all at once. It revealed itself in gestures. Princess Anne, ever unflinching, began to take on more public duties without waiting for instruction. Her way of steadying the ship she served for a lifetime. In meetings, she offered her usual candor, but with a new kind of gentleness, as if she understood that even steel can bend when the foundations tremble. Prince Edward, standing beside Sophie that midnight, became her quiet companion through a storm she never asked to announce. They spoke little in those days, but those who saw them together say their silence was full of meaning. A partnership forged not by rank, but by trust. Even the York sisters, often on the periphery, leaned inward. Beatrice, once reluctant with the spotlight, was seen more frequently at events honoring the king's charitable legacy. Eugenie, with a hand on her cousin's arm during one public appearance, offered solidarity not through titles, but through touch. And then there was Camilla, not the queen consort, not the figure of controversy, but the wife. She remained as ever close to Charles. Her presence didn't grow louder, it grew firmer. She became the person who filled the silences in the private rooms, who smoothed over pauses, who whispered comfort in corners not meant for history books. What emerged in those weeks was not orchestrated. There were no strategy meetings or formal realignments. Instead, there was a soft recalibration of roles, a shared understanding that the monarchy could no longer afford distance within its own walls. These threads of quiet unity did not bind through obligation. They wove themselves through grief, loyalty, and love, reminding a family shaped by public life that it is, at its heart, still a family. The monarchy has always been a mirror, reflecting not just itself but the world watching it. And as news of the king's condition quietly spread beyond palace walls, something rare unfolded. Silence gave way to sympathy. There was no official statement to rally around, no headline announcement. But still, the atmosphere shifted. Across breakfast tables, on train platforms, in quiet corners of Europe and the Commonwealth, people paused, not for drama, but for something far more human. Hashtags emerged not in protest, but in reverence. Support the king, for Catherine, quiet strength. They were not orchestrated by press officers. They came from nurses in Manchester, school teachers in Canada, volunteers in Kenya. People who had seen themselves in a family so often kept distant, now suddenly close, vulnerable, familiar. International papers printed soft tributes, not obituaries, not forecasts, but meditations on duty, on aging, on the dignity of preparing without spectacle. An editorial in Le Monde called Charles the Monarch of Endurance. A piece in the Sydney Morning Herald praised Catherine's grace under inherited weight. Even tabloids, often drawn to scandal, held back, as if sensing that something deeper was at play. Diplomatic cables arrived in Windsor with words rarely used in matters of state: empathy, solidarity, tenderness. From European presidents to Southeast Asian first ladies, messages were passed, not for the press, but for the heart. Charity leaders who had worked closely with the king over the years shared personal stories of handwritten notes, surprise phone calls, gestures that never made headlines, but made change. One recalled Charles attending a reforestation event despite torrential rain. He came anyway, she said. He didn't speak about legacy, he just planted trees. In an age defined by noise, the stillness around the palace became a statement in itself. And while the world waited, respectfully, uncertainly, the image that seemed to resonate most wasn't a crown, but a family seated around a hospital bed. Not out of crisis, but presence. Not in uniform, but in unity. The monarchy, for all its history, had rarely appeared so tender. And that tenderness did something no broadcast could. It reminded people that behind every symbol is a heartbeat, and that for now is enough. Long before titles shifted and decrees were whispered into being, the public had begun to notice something. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't spoken aloud, it was felt. There was a moment, small, almost unremarkable, when a mother in Cardiff watched Catherine kneel to speak with her son at eye level. Not a gesture for the cameras, just one mother seeing another. She made us feel seen, the woman later told a local reporter, not as subjects, but as people. Moments like that began to accumulate. Catherine's presence didn't flood headlines, but it softened them. Columnists who once scrutinized hemlines now wrote about tone, about patience, about the rare quality of attentiveness. The morning press began to describe her not as future queen, but as the crown's calm. Even foreign outlets, long skeptical of monarchy's relevance, began to shift. In Catherine, Der Spiegel wrote, Britain has found not just a figurehead, but a mirror. Social media, often fickle, responded with rare consistency. Posts of Catherine walking hand in hand with her children, speaking quietly with veterans, visiting hospitals without entourage. They went viral not for spectacle, but for sincerity. She became, for many, a new kind of royal, not flawless, not unreachable, but familiar. Not because she spoke often, but because she did not need to. And as the institution around her subtly recalibrated, people responded not with resistance, but with relief. The sense that, perhaps for the first time in a generation, someone within the royal circle truly understood the rhythm of ordinary life and carried that understanding into the heart of tradition. It wasn't her speeches that changed public sentiment. It was the space she held. Quiet, open, human. In Catherine, they saw not the echo of history, but the possibility of something new. A royalty that listens, and in doing so, belongs. It did not feel like the closing of a reign. There were no farewells, no public mourning, no black bunting draped across iron gates. And yet, within the quiet rhythms of palace life, something had shifted. Not because a throne had been vacated, but because a legacy had begun to pass, not downward, but forward. Charles, still very much present, had chosen not to grip power, but to guide its release. In doing so, he reframed the end not as decline, but as design. A slow yielding, built not from urgency, but from care. And those receiving this responsibility, William and Catherine, did not rise to meet it with grandeur. They stepped into it with humility. They did not speak of heiress or destinies. Instead, they spoke of duty, of family, of children who would one day ask questions about these days and deserve honest answers. Around them, the monarchy itself is being reshaped, not dismantled, but distilled. Fewer roles, more meaning, less spectacle, deeper substance. In place of grandiosity, there is a quiet precision. The kind that feels less like a system, more like a household. Within this evolving house, Catherine becomes not a figure beside the throne, but a force within it. William, in turn, becomes not just the heir, but the standard bearer for a version of royalty grounded in presence, not just protocol. For those watching from afar, it may be tempting to search for symbols, a changing of guards, a new portrait, a definitive moment. But what is happening here is softer. It is an inheritance of intent. This is not the end of Charles. It is the flowering of what he prepared, his environmental conscience, his devotion to causes, his quiet reshaping of monarchy now continued by hands he trusts. The chapter closes, but not with a full stop. It ends instead, like all enduring things do, with a pause, a breath, and the sense that something truer is just beginning.